What's up, guys? Today is, oh my gosh, I hate this mic. Today is the long awaited book review. Yes, that is correct. I read another book, as I am wont to do in reading, but it kind of blew me away for a lot of different reasons, which we'll go into. But yeah, I will go ahead and introduce it. It is Elantris. Elantris? He's probably said it on recording. I should probably have looked up how to say that. But yes, Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book he ever wrote. And I had been looking for just some new fantasy stuff to try and get into, and just kind of try to be more, I don't know, just kind of explore a little bit. And obviously Brandon Sanderson has been on my radar for a while. He finished the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. He's gotten a lot of acclaim, and I don't know why I've never read any of his works. It was just one of those things where, I had my 7 fantasy authors that I was reading, and that's kind of all that I read for a long time. Then I stopped reading fantasy for a little bit, and I had just started, getting back into it with Dave Farland stuff, who, funnily enough, fucking taught Brandon Sanderson at BYU, who he now teaches, Brandon Sanderson now teaches at BYU, which is another really big reason why I think I've fallen. I really, really enjoy his stories. I've fallen so deeply into his lore and everything is because he has like a writing class available online that you can literally just watch all the lectures. He has all sorts of shit all over his website, annotations, all kinds of stuff, and it's really like drawn me in, and it's really kind of fueled me creatively to start trying to think about different things and think about how and the way the world interacts with certain things, and his magic systems are just super intricate, super involved, super interesting, and I had always kind of wanted to dive in because he has like kind of like a Quentin Tarantino style overarching world that sort of pervades almost all of his adult fantasy novels. So yeah, so I did a lot of research where to start reading Brandon Sanderson, right? He even has a thing on his website, where do I start reading? And the general consensus is you can really start anywhere, but if you start with some of his later works, people were saying like it's so much better than his earlier works that you might not like his earlier works, or you might not appreciate the journey of like the craft. But a lot of people interestingly said to start with Mistborn and not start with Elantris, because Mistborn was like his first really big like breakout series. And they were saying Elantris was kind of rough around the edges. It wasn't really, true Sanderson style. But I was like, you know what? I'm one of those people. I like to start at the beginning, even if things are like out of chronological order. Obviously, I like to do things like experience them in the same way that other people were experiencing them, even if I'm coming into the middle of something. So I decided to go with Elantris, and I'm glad I did, because if this is bad, then I'm just beside myself to fucking read what he has to offer now. I mean, it's just delightful. It's a fantastic book, and it's one of those books where, and I love it a lot for this, right? He even goes on to explain in some of the annotations and kind of how he crafted this book. He wanted to craft it conflict without fighting. He wanted to craft a story about the people and the characters, and he wanted to craft a story around a couple of different central conceits. And I love a flashy fight scene with Dritz Stewart. It's incredible. R.A. Salvatore is fucking phenomenal at that. I love watching reading spell-slinging wizards in something like fucking Dragonlance novel by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, right? I love that shit. But I have sort of, much in the same way of like video games, where I've come to appreciate narrative and story a lot more in video games. I always liked it. It was always good, but it was always like the gameplay got me through the narrative, whereas some games now it's like I'm just playing for narrative. in a sort of similar way, Dave Farland also, his book series that I'm reading, The Rune Lords, that I did a review on way back, right? A lot of that has to do with the character development and the character arcs and character growth and everything. And I'm also a sucker for like political intrigue of sorts. And Elantris just has it all. It has incredible characters. It has great writing. It has an intricate magic system. It has intrigue. It has romance, which again, sucker for totally. It's such a well-rounded book, and there are maybe 6 fight scenes in the whole book, right? And the way that he deals with conflict, and again, reading some more of his like thoughts on the book and thoughts on how he writes and just everything like that, it really kind of sort of, you like start seeing the ones and zeros. You start entering into the matrix, being able to like pick apart how a person is writing something. And granted, I read all of that after I read the book, right? So I go through the book, and I remember there was a specific chapter where I just opened I was reading and I read a chapter. I literally closed it and I looked at Emily and I said, "What the actual fuck?" And she was like, "What?" And I had been telling her kind of about the story and kind of, just like general overview. And I was like, this fucking thing just happened. And I'm so pissed. And like, I went to bed and I was thinking like, wow, I cannot believe they did this thing, because this thing doesn't make any sense. There's no reason. That's too coincidental. And then literally, like, I opened the book back up, and like 2 pages later, it explained something that I hadn't thought of. And I was like, oh my gosh, for real? And so the whole way through the book, and actually I think I'm going to do this book review without any spoilers, because it's something that I think is incredible, right? And even though I've liked other books amazingly enough as well when I'm doing book reviews, I don't want to get into too wrapped up in explaining the story and explaining it, but the central idea of it is there's a city of godlike creatures named Elantris. The people inside are Elantrians. They can basically manipulate the world as they see fit. And one day Elantris falls, and no one can figure out why. And everyone who used to be randomly selected and gets turned into a god now gets turned to sort of this like decrepit, half human, half god like zombie thing, right? And I feel okay saying zombie because he said, Brandon Sanderson even said he wanted to write a novel about a city full of zombies. And so right from the onset, Prince of a Kingdom gets turned into a zombie. Very first thing we see in the book. Okay, boom, now he's in here. That's great. Second chapter of the book introduces his would-have-been wife arriving from a foreign country from being an arranged marriage, only to find out that her husband has died, but there was a marriage clause in a clause in her marriage contract that said she has to stay married to this dude. So now she's stuck here. Excellent. I see how this is starting to go. And then chapter 3, we find a foreign missionary from another empire who's sort of, and I would say sort of an analog to like the old Holy Roman Catholic Empire in terms of like domination and conquest, but a little bit more militaristic. And it's, he shows up with orders from his like most high one that he's got to convert everybody in 3 months. And so he does a really interesting thing called the triad system, where each chapter it goes prince, princess, priest, prince, princess, priest, prince, princess, priest. And it follows all the way through. And it was a really interesting method of writing. It was a really interesting way to tell the story. It was a really interesting way to develop scenes, especially when you could have a scene basically lead to a climax in one character's chapter and immediately switch perspectives to another character to see how certain things unfolded. And then it got a little looser towards the end of the book, dropping different perspectives in, dropping things, making it a little bit quicker, making the pace of the book a little bit faster, which was intentional from his part. And apparently there's a thing called like the I forget what he called it, the Sanderson avalanche, I think, where like and even here I knew exactly where it was. There was a part in the book where I couldn't quit reading. I literally like read a chapter and was like, I have to read and then I finished the book, right? And there's so many things happening in the end of the book, twists that were obvious to a point, twists that were intricately woven throughout the fabric of the novel, all the way from page 1 to the end. Betrayals, heroics, just like literally everything you could ask for in a fantasy novel. And yet, maybe 6 fight scenes. I don't know. I'm so enamored with this, the way that he wrote this book, the style of his writing. I actually picked up his collection of short stories because it had 2 that pertained. Well, one that pertained directly to Elantris, one that's set on the same world, and I'm going to start Mistborn soon. But I just wanted to rave a little bit about it. And it's also, it's got me thinking about storytelling, and it's got me thinking about how I would craft certain things. And yeah, it was just a really, really good book. So like I said, no spoilers for this one. I just want to say that honestly, this might be, and maybe not, I feel like this would be a book, and he even talks about it in one of his lectures. He talks about the reason why I write science fiction fantasy is because those are the only 2 genres that get away with being other genres, right? If you write a romance novel, it's a romance novel. If you put elves in it, it's a fantasy novel, even if it's the same thing, even if it's the exact same novel, right? You could write a historical fiction novel and put, fucking steampunk shit in it, and it becomes a sci-fi novel, right? You could do a mystery novel and put dwarves in it, and it's et cetera, right? So I think this is, I'm curious because I can't tell if it's something where I feel like I would say like this is a fantasy novel that I would recommend people to read. But it is slow in parts, right? It's not what I would consider a grand epic. It is not I wouldn't say it's an epic fantasy novel. I would say that it is certainly a fantasy novel. But I think it's grounded in reality, and I think that there's a lot, and he even talks about some particular characters that are sort of anachronisms to the time of the book itself, that are like a little too modern. But I think that those modernisms, I feel like, enhance the book in a way that I feel like it's very accessible. I'll read Mistborn, and I think I should be able to make a judgment. I would say that Stormlight Archives is probably something that, if you're not into fantasy, the density is very would be very intimidating and what have you, because I always used to say like Crystal Shard, right? Like the book that I started reading fantasy with, it's incredible, and I think it's one of the best fantasy novels ever. Even not reading the rest of the Icewind Dale trilogy, the Crystal Shard itself is such an important fantasy work, I think, that I used to say like that's always the one that I would recommend anyone read. But this might be, I feel like it bridges some gaps. I feel like maybe you don't get a true like traditional fantasy book, but I wonder if it's, if it's something akin to a bridge. I will say it is a little thicker than I would like to have someone introduced to. It's I think like 500 pages. It looks really thin. Yeah, it's a little over 500 pages, which is still pretty dense. And I think the Crystal Shard's like 300. So it might still be, but I don't know. I love the book. That's basically all I wanted to say. All right, you've got to listen to me ramble for 15 minutes about the book. I appreciate it so much. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow.